A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from Satan the accursed. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Brothers and sisters in Islam and in humanity, I greet you with the greetings of peace, the greetings of Allah's prophets and messengers. Peace be upon you, or as we traditionally have it in Islam, Assalamu alaikum. You're welcome to this program of Shari'ah Intelligence, where we will be looking at the principles, the maxims, and the higher intents and purposes of Islamic jurisprudence. I will be your host, inshallah, Muhammad Nurudeen Lemu, and with me to discuss this subject would be a number of facilitators who have been trainers in this particular course. Today we have Brother Nasir Bello, who has been a volunteer and a top trainer with the Dawah Institute. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
And Sister Salatu Sule, who also has been a trainer with this program and a volunteer with the Dawah Institute, as is Brother Nasir Bello.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
We'll start with a very general overview of what Sharia Intelligence is actually about. This course gets its name from the Dawah Institute, where the name was coined as a shorthand abstraction to the three fields that are critical in juristic reasoning called ijtihad. The first field is usulul fiqh, the principles of Islamic jurisprudence, the methodology of deriving evidence for Islamic rulings and law. The second is qawaid al-fiqhiyya, Islamic legal philosophy or Islamic maxims. And the third is maqasid Sharia, the higher intents, objectives, goals, aims, and purposes of Sharia. Sharia refers to the full way of life that is prescribed by the Qur'an and Sunnah. And when we say Sharia intelligence, we mean in a similar vein as we will use terms like emotional intelligence or social intelligence or ecological intelligence. What we mean is a sensible understanding, an intelligent understanding of the practice and the teachings of the message of the Qur'an and Sunnah in our lives. By Sharia intelligence, we are trying to develop and think better, think in a manner that is faithful as best as we can to the principles, approaches, values, and objectives of the Qur'an and the Sunnah. More specifically, it is the understanding of how various methodological tools and principles are used by jurists in their juristic reasoning or ijtihad in a very integrated manner to improve the quality of fatwas and religious rulings. Fiqh or Islamic jurisprudence is more like medicine than mathematics. In mathematics, the answer to a question would be the same whether you are in one part of the world or whether you are on the moon. Whereas with medicine, what would be the answer to a person's illness, what would be the prescription to somebody who is not feeling well, would depend on the age of the person, the context, what other medication they are taking, etc. Sharia intelligence, therefore, is also the ability to navigate with humility, with respect, the often complex, divergent, and even conflicting opinions of Muslim jurists through various ages, generations, contexts, and through the different schools of law, as these scholars try to represent the Prophet ﷺ, try to represent the principles and purposes of the Qur'an and the prophetic tradition in changing contexts and circumstances. I'd like to address, starting with Brother Nasir Bello, what more can you tell us about what Sharia intelligence is before we move into the more substantive topic?
Well, for me, Sharia intelligence is about understanding the cognitive toolkit used by mujtahid and fatwa councils in their juristic reasoning in trying to address situations, changing contexts, while they represent the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sharia intelligence is a guide for Muslims to live Islam with purpose in a world that is characterized by volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. The field of ijtihad and is very much similar to the field of industrial pharmacy. If you look at what industrial pharmacists try to do, is to try to come up with medication for different ailments and different diseases across different contexts. So does the mujtahid in his ijtihad process. He is trying to come up with solutions to a different set of problems that crop up in the Muslim society as they live their own normal lives. Sharia intelligence as a course comprises of 3 important fields which scholars use in regulating the process of ijtihad. We have the usulul fiqh, which is actually the legal theory and principles of Islamic jurisprudence. We equally have the maxims, or what we call the Islamic legal philosophy, and we also have the intent or higher purposes of Sharia, that is maqasidu Sharia. In trying to expose participants to, so Sharia intelligence is about exposing participants to the quality control mechanism used by scholars in crafting rulings or fatwa and reviewing laws, and also trying to determine the appropriateness of a fatwa to a variety of contexts. Sharia intelligence is about aligning new fatwas with the objectives of Qur'an and Sunnah, and also trying to understand why scholars use different approaches, or they vary in their approaches to issuing fatwa or addressing problems. Allahu ta'ala alam.
Jazakallahu khairan. Sister Salah, would you have anything to add to this?
Yes. When we talk about Sharia, we are looking at the different players in the field. We have all those experts. You have the mufti, you have the fuqaha, you have the mujtahid, then you talk about qawaidul fiqhiyya and maqasidu Sharia, and you have all these areas, so that you are talking about a very wide field that has a lot of depth and is very complex. So the impression is given that it's really something that's restricted for just the experts to learn, those who want to become jurists themselves. However, when we go into how this field developed, how this field of Sharia evolved to what it is today, what you really have is, it was jurists and Muslims trying to solve everyday problems, trying to respond to everyday situations. It's therefore useful when Muslims, the everyday Muslim, the layman, the lay person, becomes interested in how do the jurists arrive at their conclusions? How do they find those solutions? And why do you have a situation where one scholar says A, another scholar says B, and A and B are not rhyming, they're actually contradictory when you just look at them? This understanding is necessary because it's similar to saying it's okay if I know what a car looks like, I know what the tires are like. It doesn't matter if I know how to drive, or if I understand when the driver of the car I'm in is driving carelessly or not. It matters. So the Sharia Intelligence course is meant to help people understand not just the car, but what is good driving. And even if you can't drive, can you identify good driving when you see it? It's not meant to create experts. Of course, that would be a great byproduct. But at the very least, if you say the jurists are like doctors and nurses, they are the experts, you want to be able to create people who understand what good first aid is, where someone knows if somebody is bleeding and I'm present, what can I do to fill in the gap between the time the person is with me and when the person goes to see a nurse or a doctor. That's what I would like to add.
Thank you very much. Just picking on that, could you say more on why this course is important? What would be the reason for lay people and those involved in Islamic work and talking about Islam? Why would this be an important course?
Because let's say people involved in Islamic work, they are not the jurists, but they interact with people who raise questions and ask them sometimes the most basic questions. As someone involved in Islamic work, you might give an answer which you believe is right. But if you don't know even just the basics of how to arrive at a good answer, an answer that takes you as close as possible to the true spirit and teaching of Islam, you might inadvertently teach people the wrong thing. If it's a lay person, I may not always have access to a scholar. I may not always be able to say, I want to ask this mufti or that mufti. So how do I even help myself? And if I do go to a scholar and the scholar gives me an answer, do I have a certain level of understanding to analyze the answer I've been given, to realize this answer sounds good, but it's not really it? That's why I think it's important for the layperson.
Excellent. So they say in the country of the blind, the one-eyed is king. So I think what we're trying to do is reduce the number of blind so that at least they can know the difference between a one-eyed and a two-eyed. Malam Nasir, what would you add to?
Well, I think as she rightly mentioned, the whole idea of the course is an introductory course that hopes to expose participants, not necessarily make them specialists in the field, but to elevate their understanding given the changes in context, to elevate their understanding, to be able to at least identify the right person to ask. Within the Islamic tradition, there are different specialists of different fields. So in the event that a problem crops out or surfaced, who is the right person, who is the right specialist to address this kind of problem? And also, how do you identify meanings of the text and its application in different contexts? How do you identify and deconstruct extremist ideas that are actually creating problem in the society? So essentially, the course is really, if Usul were a big city, the course is just about following the main road that you pass through. At least you can be able to see some things and identify them. And that to a large extent will help vaccinate young participants, particularly young Muslims, in trying to engage and ask the right questions. It will equip them to intellectually deconstruct ideas that are not in line with the classical methodologies. I think these are some of the reasons why the course is very important. Allahu Alam.
Yes.
If I may add to that, there's also this aspect of the course where it helps you understand what Islam is. Because personally for me, growing up, that was a question I always wondered. What is Islam? What does it mean to be a Muslim in practical terms? And while many times I got various answers, going through the Shari'ah Intelligence course myself again and again helped me get a bird's eye view of what it means to be a Muslim in practical everyday terms. So that if you're talking about social issues or personal interrelationship or work or the spiritual side of stuff, the Sharia Intelligence course offers you definite answers and deeper understanding of what it means to be a Muslim when you shave off all the technical terms and the jargon and you say leave the experts out of it. Just you as an ordinary person, as a Muslim, what does it mean? I think the course answers that question well.
And I think it's also very important given the situation the world is now in, or the Ummah is, where you have a variety of scholars trying to come up with different, contradicting, sometimes conflicting opinions. Having able to go through the course, at least you will be equipped enough to understand who is right, who is wrong, whether the idea or the fatwa that is given fits the context you are living in or is for another context.
Good. So as you've both mentioned, one benefit is even if you don't know how to drive a car, you can still recognize a bad driver. You still know what bad driving looks like, even if they say, okay, you drive. You can know, I don't know how to drive, but I definitely know you're not a good driver. This issue of the fundamentals, that one knows what are those, scholars describe them as ma'alum min ad-din bid-darura, those essential fundamental core teachings of Islam. What are they, and how does one distinguish them between those things that there's legitimate difference of opinion among scholars when it comes to those topics, and the need to agree to disagree agreeably, as it were. What should we expect to cover, Malam Nasir? What do we expect to cover? If you could give us just a broad overview of the various parts of the course, what do we expect to cover?
Well, as mentioned earlier, the course comprises of 3 very important fields of Islamic science or Islamic tradition. We have the Usulul Fiqh, which deals with the source principles and legal theory of Islam, Islamic jurisprudence. We also have the legal maxims, what we call legal philosophy, Islamic legal philosophy. And we also have the last segment, which deals with the objectives, the purpose, and of course the intents of Sharia. Now, the course is actually divided into 4 parts. The first part deals with introduction to Usulul Fiqh, where we'll be looking at the definition of the concepts and terminologies in the subject of Usulul Fiqh, what Usulul Fiqh is, what is ijtihad, and then the processes of ijtihad, where you look at the outcomes, you look at the tools of ijtihad, the primary and the secondary tools of ijtihad, you look at the outcome of the Prophet, what we call the Islamic legal rulings, which has to do with your classification of what we call ahkam al-shar'iyya, and of course ahkam al-wada'iyya, the defining laws, and of course the declarative laws or the enablers that allow for proper implementation. Now, if you come to the second part, you will be looking at what they call in search of certainty, the need to be cautious when it comes to speaking in God's name. There, we will be looking at how scholars develop mechanism of ascertaining and verifying sources of Sharia and trying to checkmate and ensure that they are authentic and they represent the objectives and the purpose of Sharia. So it's a question of verifying authenticity and of course the implication in meaning. So basically these are the first two parts that we are going to be covering.
Excellent.
The last two parts, that's module 3 and 4, because the course is broken up into modules. That's where we focus on the Qawaidul Fiqhiyya, that's the Islamic legal maxims or principles, as well as the Maqasidul Sharia, that's module 4, where we are looking at the purposes, the higher intents of Sharia law. Taken together, we could say these different fields that we'll cover all the way from module 1 to 4 are like learning about the car and its parts, and then how to drive the car. What traffic rules should you respect as you drive that car? And do you have a destination in mind? And what's that destination? And the manner of driving, will it get you to that destination? So that when you say we've got a situation or a problem, and you're going to look for answers from Islamic teachings, where do you go to get your answers? Who gives those answers? What methods will this person follow? What protocols will the person follow to give you the answers? And when you do have your answers, are you mindful of the spirit of Islamic teachings? And what's your aim? What's your purpose? What do you think that answer will help you achieve? That's a summary of what we'll be covering in Shari'ah Intelligence course, inshallah.
Excellent. So we're looking here at those three subject areas or fields of usulul fiqh, which you use the metaphors being like driving a car.
Yes.
Qawaidul fiqhiyya, which are like the traffic rules, and the maqasid sharia, the objectives of sharia, the destination, the final point, what sharia is trying to achieve. How do these three fields come together to improve the quality of fatwas? How does triangulation, if we use that word, and cross-referencing, how does that help the mujtahid or the jurist in giving a fatwa?
Okay. When we look at the three fields, usulul fiqh, qawaidul fiqhiyya, al-maqasid sharia, I like calling them the big three. What they do is to emphasize various aspects of Islamic teachings. Each aspect is distinct, yet they overlap. Each aspect is actually rooted in Qur'an and Sunnah. That's where they have their anchor. When you look back at the history of its evolution or development, you'll discover that there was a time, yes, when we didn't have these terminologies, when the fields were not so clearly articulated or outlined or separated. But when you say the content of each of these fields, you find that those same methods, those same protocols were practiced even by the companions. And they were basing their practice on the practice of the Prophet ﷺ, that's the Sunnah, and the practice of, or rather the teachings of the Quran itself. So the three fields, they balance each other, they overlap, but they have certain distinctions. We have, as we've mentioned earlier, usulul fiqh, which is really saying, here are the source evidence, the pieces of evidence you have to work with if you want to arrive at a solution or an answer. And when we say here they are, how do you rank them? Which comes before what? So that's usulul fiqh. When you then look at the qawaidul fiqhiyya, you are saying, what's the spirit of Islam? And what that field has done is embody the spirit of Islam in short sentences, paraphrasing them, paraphrasing the verses of the Quran or the ayahs or the hadith. For instance, if you take the very first maxim that goes thus, Al-umuru bima qasidiha, you'll find that that is just a rephrasing of inna a'malu biniyya. So you have that very clear connection, preserving the spirit of Islam using short, pithy sentences. Then you have maqasidul sharia, which is really just focusing on the purpose, the higher intent, the objective of Sharia law, your destination in a sense.
Wonderful. Could you add anything to that?
Well, of course, although these critical and very important subject areas in our tradition overlapping somehow, they actually come from different perspectives. And what they do is to serve as filters to one another. Usul is more of a factory where the fatwa is produced. But then for you to ascertain its applicability and validity, you have to use certain filters. And this is what maqasid and of course the qawaid does for you. Essentially, these three important, or the process of triangulation, basically help in ensuring that the fatwa produced is in line with the spirit of Qur'an and Sunnah. Allahu Alam.
Thank you very much. I think how you summarized it, that usulul fiqh is like the factory, qawaid is a filter that ensures that the product of ijtihad does not conflict with the spirit of Sharia, and that the field of maqasid ensures that a fatwa is not creating harm. It's actually realizing a maqasid or an objective of Sharia, that these three always work together and have to work together to ensure the best quality fatwa that would be the closest approximation that a mujtahid or a distinguished scholar would arrive at when they are trying to represent the Prophet, peace be upon him, in his absence. I'd like to thank you both for your contributions. That's where we will stop for now, inshallah. When we return, we will move on to the next lessons and next episodes in this program of Shari'ah Intelligence. Thank you very much. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.